A new life. Jax stepped out of the spaceport into the bright sunlight of Zephyria, squinting as his eyes adjusted from the dim interior of the transport ship. He shouldered his duffel bag, packed with a few precious mementos and basic supplies, and surveyed the alien landscape before him. Craggy purple mountains loomed in the distance, their jagged peaks scraping an orange sky. Dry, rust-colored earth crunched beneath his boots. The air smelled faintly metallic, with an underlying sweetness he couldn't place. A fresh start, he mused, inhaling deeply. Exactly what he needed after the war. "Hey there, need a ride into town?" A jovial voice called out. Jax turned to see a short, stocky alien waving at him from beside a battered hover truck. Her blue skin and head tendrils marked her as a native Zephyr. "Much obliged," Jax replied, striding over. "I'm Jax, just in from the core worlds." "Zola," she said, shaking his hand vigorously. "Welcome to New Esperanza Colony. Toss your bag in the back and hop in." As they drove into town, Zola kept up a steady stream of chatter, pointing out the small prefab homes and ramshackle businesses that made up the colony. Jax listened with half an ear, more focused on the stark beauty of the landscape. "So what brings a human way out here to the frontier?" Zola asked. Jax shrugged. "Looking for a fresh start, I guess. Spent the last decade fighting the Krell on half a dozen worlds. Time for something new." Zola nodded. "We get a lot of vets out here. Quiet life, plenty of space. You planning to stake a homestead claim?" "That's the idea," Jax said. "Thought I'd set up in that valley to the west, by the mountains." Zola's head tendrils writhed, and she shot him a sharp look. "Terra Valley. You don't want to go messing around there. Trust me." "Terra Valley," Jax repeated, raising an eyebrow. "Why's it called that?" "On account of all the folks who've gone missing in it over the years. Settlers who built out that way and were never seen again. Most recent was a Grawl named Yorick, not 2 months ago." Jax frowned. Missing settlers. In his experience, that usually meant either natural hazards or hostile fauna. Nothing a seasoned soldier like him couldn't handle. "I think I'll take my chances." Zola shook her head. "Your funeral," she muttered, but there was a gleam of interest in her eyes, behind the concern. "Look, I run supplies out to the homesteads. If you're set on this, wave me when you're ready, and I'll freight out some gear and provisions for you." "Mighty generous, thanks." She flashed him a toothy grin. "Least I can do for fresh meat, I mean, a newcomer." She dropped Jax at the land claims office, promising to catch up with him later. He spent the afternoon filing the necessary paperwork for his homestead. The board clerk processing his claim barely reacted when Jax indicated his chosen plot in the valley. "Sure you want to build there? Folks say it's bad luck." Jax simply nodded. "I'll manage." An hour later, with the claim logged and a stack of colony welcome guides and homesteading tips in hand, Jax stepped back out into the late afternoon sun. He had a good feeling about this place, about the life he was going to build here. And if there were dangers lurking in the pretty little valley he now called home, then he'd just have to face them head on. Just like always, Jax hitched his bag over his shoulder and started walking toward his new land, a smile tugging at his lips and a spring in his step. His new life started now. Mysteries abound. The first few weeks on his homestead passed uneventfully as Jax threw himself into the hard labor of building a life on the frontier. The valley was as picturesque as he first thought, with rolling green hills, jarrowwood forests, and the crystal-clear stream that burbled through the center of his claim. The soil was dark and rich, promising good harvests once he tilled and planted his fields. Each day he rose with the sun, laboring to raise the prefab walls of his cabin, dig the footings for his barn, and clear the fields for planting. It was backbreaking work, but satisfying, so different from the ugly destruction of his soldier days. Here he was creating, building. It felt good, honest. Still, Jax couldn't shake the feeling of being watched as he worked, the hair on the back of his neck prickling at odd moments. At night, Strange noises echoed across the valley. Animalistic cries he couldn't quite place, even with his cynofauna training. And one morning, he found odd tracks circling his cabin, unsettlingly large and clawed. Nothing like the small native wildlife he'd seen so far. When Zola arrived in her battered freighter 2 weeks after he settled in, Jax was surprised to find himself glad to see another sentient face. They sat on his porch, sipping the strong, dark kava he brewed, watching the sun set fire to the mountains as it sank. "Place is really coming along," Zola remarked, eyeing the sturdy cabin and neatly stacked supply crates. "I half expected to find you'd hightailed it back to civilization." Jax chuckled. "Not likely, though I'm starting to see why the valley has its reputation. The noises at night, the feeling of being watched." Zola shuddered. "Gives me the creeps just thinking about it. Oh, that reminds me." She set down her mug and reached into her satchel, pulling out a battered datavat. "I did some digging in the colonial archives about those missing settlers. Found out the last one. That Grell, Yorick. He had a wife, Nissa. She stayed behind in town when he went missing." Jax leaned forward, interested. "Did she say what happened?" "Not much. Refused to talk about it, according to the records. But get this, a few days later, she left town in the middle of the night. Took a shuttle off-world and hadn't been seen since." "Curiouser and curiouser," Jax murmured. "Anything else?" Zola hesitated. There were some fragments of a message Yorick sent her just before he vanished. Talks about discovering a cavern in the cliffs at the valley's end. Something about ruins and ancient secrets. Pretty wild stuff. An uneasy silence settled over them as night fell, and the stars emerged, alien constellations wheeling overhead. Jax's mind raced. What had Yorick found in that cavern? And was it connected to the other disappearances? "Well, I'd better head back," Zola said at last, standing and stretching. "Got an early delivery to the Martins' place tomorrow. Let me know if you need anything else freighted out, yeah?" "Will do." And Zola, "Thanks for the supplies and the information." She flashed him a grin. "Anytime, Jax. That's what friends are for. Just be careful out here, okay? Something's not right about this place." Jax lay awake for a long time that night, listening to the eerie cries echoing through the valley, and wondering what secrets it held. He had a feeling that he was standing on the edge of something huge, something that could change everything. The question was, would he survive long enough to uncover the truth? The cavern. The next morning, as the first sun's light slanted into the valley, Jax set out to find Yorick's cavern. Armed with the vague details from Zola's tale, his old pulse rifle, and a grim determination, he hiked toward the cliffs at the valley's western edge. It was late afternoon by the time he found it, a narrow fissure half hidden behind a tumble of boulders. A chill ran up his spine as he approached. The air felt different here, charged with an unseen energy. Jax switched on his rifle's lamp with a snap, casting a blue-white beam into the gloom. The cave walls were smooth, too smooth to be natural. As he moved deeper, he saw strange symbols carved into the stone, twisting alien glyphs that seemed to writhe in the light. A sense of unease grew in his gut. What had Yorick called this place? Ancient ruins. The passageway opened into a vast chamber, the beam of his lamp unable to reach the far walls or ceiling. But what it did illuminate stole Jax's breath. Towering structures of an oily black metal rose from the cavern floor, twisting spires and jagged arches that defied gravity. Between them ran tangles of metal piping and thick, ropey cables. It was like no ruins Jax had ever seen, more like some mad fusion of organic and machine. In the center of it all, suspended in a web of crackling energy beams, was a shape out of nightmare. Part biological, part cybernetic, it was as large as a ground transport and looked like an unholy combination of reptile, insect, and mechanized war rig. Armored plates the color of old blood covered its hunched, segmented body. Vicious talons tipped its 6 articulated limbs. Its wedge-shaped head bristled with antennae, mandibles, and glowing optics. Jax could only stare, his mind refusing to accept what he was seeing. This thing couldn't be natural. It had been engineered, built for gods knew what purpose, and he had the gut-wrenching certainty that this was what had been taking the settlers. As if in response to his thoughts, the creature's optics flared to sudden, baleful life. The energy beams suspending it flickered and died as it began to uncurl from its fetal crouch, with the shriek of metal on metal. Jax didn't hesitate. He turned and ran, a primal terror lending speed to his pumping legs. Behind him, an unearthly shriek echoed through the cavern, a sound of fury and hunger that froze his blood. He burst from the cave mouth in a shower of gravel, not daring to look back. The ground shook with the crash of something huge smashing through stone and metal. Jax fumbled for his calm with shaking hands as he sprinted. "Zola!" he screamed when the link connected. "Emergency evac now. Valley's western edge." "Jax, what's going?" A tortured metal scream drowned out her words. Jax risked a glance over his shoulder and immediately wished he hadn't. The creature was tearing its way out of the cliffside in a shower of rocks, its massive body uncoiling, optics burning with malevolent light. "Just get here," Jax roared, and focused on running, lungs and legs burning. The thunder of pursuit was drawing closer, the creature's shrieks ripping the air. He wouldn't make it, a calm corner of his mind realized. It was too fast. He couldn't outrun it. The roar of thrusters blasted overhead, followed by the hammering of a heavy mass driver. Zola's freighter swooped past, ramp lowered, the Zephyr woman raining covering fire on the creature. Jax put on a final desperate burst of speed and leaped, barely catching the edge of the ramp. Zola hauled him aboard and slammed the hatch controls while Jax lay panting on the deck. What in the seven hells was that? Zola demanded, her eyes wild. "Big trouble," Jax gasped out between heaving breaths. He staggered to the cockpit and stared out the view screen. In the valley below, the creature screeched its fury to the sky as the freighter clawed for altitude. Its armored hide was pocked and scorched from mass driver hits that should have reduced it to a smear, but it barely looked phased. And with a chill of dread, Jax saw it rear back on its haunches, muscles coiling beneath its carapace, manted head swiveling to track their ship with terrible purpose. His shout of warning came an instant too late. The creature leaped, an impossible bound that carried it nearly level with the ship, and latched onto the hull with its razor talons. The ship lurched and bucked as Zola fought the controls. "It's too heavy," she screamed over blaring alarms. "We're going down." The ground spun up to meet them with horrifying speed. In the instant before impact, Jax had one clear thought. What had they unleashed on this unsuspecting world? Then the sky fell on him in a roar of tortured metal, shattering composites and flame. And darkness swallowed him whole. Darkness rising. Jax came to in a haze of pain, the coppery taste of blood in his mouth. He pried his eyes open, blinking grit from his lashes, and tried to focus. Smoke stung his nose, acrid and thick. The freighter's interior was a twisted ruin, consoles sparking and debris strewn everywhere. A charred hole gaped in the port bulkhead, edges still glowing cherry red. Zola. The thought pierced the fog in his skull. Where was Zola? He found her slumped over the controls, azure blood leaking from a gash on her head. For a sickening second, he thought her dead, but then he saw the rise and fall of her chest and nearly wept with relief. "Zola, Zola, wake up. We need to move." His voice was a rasp, barely audible over the ringing in his ears. He shook her shoulder, hissing as the motion sent agony lancing through his own battered body. She stirred with a groan. "Jax, what happened?" Her eyes widened with remembered horror. "That thing. Where is it?" Jax gritted his teeth and forced himself upright, every joint screaming protest. He staggered to the ruined hatch and peered out, dreading what he'd see. A long furrow scared the earth where the ship had come down, gouged by the crash. They were deep in the jarrah wood forest. Massive boles splintered and toppled by their impact. Of their attacker, there was no sign, only the jagged rents its claws had torn in the hull. "Must have jumped free before we hit," Jax said grimly. "We need to warn the colony. Can you walk?" Zola nodded, wincing as she levered herself up. They salvaged what they could from the wreckage: a couple of pulse pistols, a med kit, some emergency rations. Then, leaning on each other, they limped into the twilight forest. The jarrah woods were eerie at night, the shadows seeming to writhe with hidden menace. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves, set Jax's nerves jangling, certain the creature was about to come bursting from the darkness. But the attack never came. When they finally staggered into New Esperanza, well past midnight, they found the colony in uproar. Terrified settlers thronged the streets, many clutching makeshift weapons. Jax flagged down a pasty-faced Harat, their forearms quivering with distress. "What's going on?" he demanded. "Monsters," the Harat wailed. "Horrible monsters attacking the homesteads, dragging people off into the night. Militia's been called, but—" They shook their head helplessly. Ice settled in Jax's gut. They were too late. The creature was already hunting. He exchanged a harrowed look with Zola. "This is bad." That thing shrugged off a full dump from your mass driver like it was nothing. "The militia won't stand a chance." Zola nodded grimly. "We've got to do something. We can't just let that abomination slaughter people." Jax set his jaw. She was right. This was all his fault. If he hadn't disturbed that cavern, set the creature free, he had to make this right. Somehow. A shout from the street drew their attention. A convoy of military transports was rolling into town, blue-white searchlights stabbing the darkness. Troops in powered armor dismounted, railguns and plasma cannons at the ready. A murmur of relief ran through the crowd. The militia was here. Surely they'd put a stop to this nightmare. But Jax only felt his dread deepen. They had no idea what they were facing. He pushed through the throng, heading for the officer barking orders from the center of the chaos. The man looked up as Jax approached, his expression grim beneath his helmet visor. "This area is under military lockdown," he snapped. "All civilians need to get to the shelters." "Sir, listen to me," Jax cut him off urgently. "You don't understand what you're up against. That thing out there, it's not just some wild animal. It's a weapon engineered to kill." The officer's eyes narrowed. "And how would you know that?" "Because I'm the one who set it free," Jax said heavily. "I found it in a cavern in the valley. Some kind of stasis chamber left over from the ancestors. I disturbed it. Woke it up." "You did what?" The officer hissed, his face paling. "It's my fault," Jax said, meeting his gaze squarely. "And I'll take responsibility for it. But right now, you need to know that conventional weapons won't stop this thing. It's armored like a dreadnought and regenerates almost instantly." The officer hesitated, clearly torn between skepticism and the naked conviction in Jax's voice. Before he could respond, a scream pierced the night, raw with terror and abruptly cut short. Pulse fire and plasma bolts lit the darkness as the soldiers opened up, but their shots were lost in a cacophony of shrieks, rending metal, and human agony. Searchlights swung wildly, catching glimpses of the creature as it tore through the militia line like a scythe through wheat. Soldiers were flung through the air like broken dolls, power armor crumpling beneath talons that could shear through tank plating. Vicious claws found gaps in ceramic plate, tore through flesh and bone. The troops fell back in disarray before the onslaught, their disruptor blades and grav maces almost useless. Jax could only watch in numb horror as the militia's position collapsed, the creature ravening through their ranks. This was a slaughter. They couldn't win this, not with brute force. That left only one option. He grabbed Zola's arm, dragging her back from the carnage. "We can't fight this head-on," he shouted over the din of battle. "We need to be smart. Lure it away from the colony, back to the valley." Her eyes were wild with fear, but she nodded gamely. What then? I've got a few ideas. Insane ideas, but they were all out of sane options. I need you to round up anyone still standing, evacuate all the civilians. Get them to the shelters and seal the doors. What about you? Jax hefted his pulse rifle grimly. I'm going to get that thing's attention. Give you time to get clear. Zola clasped his shoulder fiercely. Don't you dare die on me, Jax. I expect you at my wedding feast, and I'll be pissed if I have to drink your share of the julep wine. Despite everything, a ghost of a smile touched his lips. Wouldn't miss it. Then he was turning away, thumbing his rifle to full power and steeling himself for what was to come. The militia line had collapsed entirely by now, the few survivors fleeing in total rout. Amid the bodies and the blasted wreckage of vehicles, the creature rampaged, its shrieks of rage and bloodlust turning Jax's bowels to water. He stepped out into the open, raising his weapon. Hey, ugly, he roared. Remember me. The creature whirled, optics flaring crimson as they locked on him. Its mangled maw opened in a screech of fury, and it coiled to spring. Jax didn't wait for it to leap. He opened fire, pouring shot after searing shot into its face as he backpedaled furiously. The ion bolts marred its armored hide not at all, but they clearly hurt, a fact he used ruthlessly, blasting its eyes, its more vulnerable joints, anything to enrage it. It worked. With an ear-splitting howl, the monstrosity gave chase, bounding after Jax like a predator after wounded prey. He ran, lungs burning and heart thundering against his ribs, praying his plan would work, praying he could end the horror he'd unleashed, praying he could earn his people's forgiveness, even if he didn't survive to hear it spoken. Terra stands. They crashed through the Terra wood, a mad flight through darkness, where every shadow leaped with talons, and every tree branch became a claw. Jax had always considered himself fit, his body honed by war, but fear lent him speed he never knew he possessed. Yet the creature matched him effortlessly, toying with him. It could have caught him in a heartbeat if it wished. But it seemed to relish the chase, the scent of his terror. Perhaps that was why it pursued him alone, ignoring the other fleeing colonists. Some cruel facet of its engineering, a predatory need to chase, to run its prey to ground. Sweat stung his eyes and his muscles screamed, but he dared not slow. The valley was close now. He could feel it. If he could just reach it. A massive shadow blurred across his path, and Jax had to hurl himself sideways to avoid a scything talon. He hit the dirt hard, rolling to absorb the impact, his rifle tumbling from his grasp. Lightning quick, the creature pounced, its hideous visage filling his world, only to rear back with an enraged shriek as pulse bolts hammered its flank. Jax scrambled away, gasping, searching wildly for the source of the fire. It was Zola, and she wasn't alone. A ragtag band of colonists stood with her, armed with a motley assortment of civilian-grade laser carbines, plasma pistols, even a few antique kinetics. At their head was the militia officer, one arm a bloody ruin, but his remaining hand hefting a disruptor blade. Thought you could use some backup, Zola called, tossing Jax his rifle. He caught it with a nod of thanks, something suspiciously like hope kindling in his chest. The civilians? He asked as he popped a fresh charge into the weapon. Safe in the shelters, Zola confirmed. We've sealed the access tunnels. That thing's not getting in. The creature was recovering quickly, turning to face this new threat with a hiss. Zola's group spread out, forming a loose crescent. They looked terrified but determined, a glint of something hard and defiant in their eyes. Pushed to the brink, the people of New Esperanza were finally pushing back. We're with you, Jax, the militia officer rasped. To whatever end. This is our home. We'll fight for it. Jax felt a fierce swell of pride. Against all odds, in the face of nightmares made flesh, the indomitable human spirit endured. And he would be damned if he let it gutter out here. To me, he roared, and charged. They crashed against the creature like a human wave, a fusillade of energy bolts and slugs slamming into its armored hide. It screeched in rage, lashing out with its razor claws, but they refused to give ground. Zola blew off a leg with her mass driver, sending it staggering. The militia officer darted in, his disruptor blade burning white-hot as he hacked at the joint of its other forelimb. A bloody furrow opened, and the creature recoiled with a shriek. Jax emptied his rifle into its eyes, the searing bolts bursting 3 of the glowing orbs like rotten fruit. Ichor splattered, and the monster reared, half-blind, its remaining optics fever-bright with agony and fury. Yet slowly, inexorably, its wounds began to close. Mangled limbs knitted back together. Ichor ceased to flow as rents in its hide sealed shut. They were hurting it, but not enough. Not fast enough. It would outlast them, and they all knew it. They needed to change the odds, and fast. As if in answer to his thoughts, Jax's gaze fell on the gnarled bulk of an ancient Terra tree, far older and more massive than its fellows, and in a flash of desperate inspiration, he had his plan. "Zola," he yelled. "The tree, bring it down on the freak." Her head-tails writhed in urgent agreement. As one, they turned their fire on the Terra's trunk, blasting away with all they had. The wood was dense and sturdy, resisting the onslaught of energy, but it was never meant to withstand such punishment. With a tortured groan, the tree began to topple, directly onto the creature. Zola whooped in savage joy as the shadow fell across their foe, only to choke off in horror as it contemptuously swatted the multi-ton bowl aside. The impact barely phased it. They were out of options. Despair crashed over Jax. His rifle's charge was nearly spent, as were the others' weapons. They couldn't keep this up. It was regenerating faster than they could wear it down. In minutes, maybe less, it would be on them, tearing, rending, an unstoppable engine of death and ruin. Unless, one chance, one final, desperate play. May the ancestors forgive him. "Fall back," Jax roared to the others. "Get out of the valley. Go now." They hesitated fractionally, confusion and defiance warring on their faces. But the authority in his voice brooked no argument. Reluctantly, shooting him looks of mute appeal, they began to disengage. Zola lingered, anguish twisting her features. "Jax, go." He met her eyes, trying to convey everything he couldn't say. "Please, leave this to me." For a long, terrifying second, he thought she would refuse. Then, with a last agonized glance, she turned and fled, rounding up the stragglers and urging them to run. And then it was him alone against the nightmare, the valley walls rising to either side like the jaws of a trap he'd walked willingly into. The creature stalked toward him, gait smooth and deliberate now that its quarry was alone, its wounds almost fully healed. It knew it had him. "That's right," Jax murmured, slowly backing away, praying his voice wouldn't betray his terror. "Eyes on me, you bastard. Just you and me now." He had to time this perfectly. Draw it in, make it commit. Too soon, and it would veer off. Too late. Well, too late didn't bear thinking about. 20 paces back. 15. 10. The cliffs reared behind him, deep cracks splitting the stone. He felt their edge beneath his heel. Nowhere left to run. The creature lunged, and Jax fired his rifle, full power, point blank into the widest of the cracks. The weapon shrieked protest, cycling far past its tolerances, but it held together for one last, world-shattering shot, a ravening spear of destruction that plunged into the cliff face like the wrath of ancient gods. The concussion threw Jax from his feet. Stone shattered, geysers of pulverized rock vomiting from the cracks. With a groan like a dying colossus, an entire section of the cliff face collapsed. Tons upon tons of stone, crashing down on the creature an instant before its claws would have torn Jax to ribbons. The world vanished in a roar of tortured earth, choking dust, and tumbling boulders. Jax felt a flash of agony, a sense of terrible weight. Then, mercifully, nothingness. Secrets of Terra Valley. Consciousness returned slowly, the first thing impinging on the comfortable dark being a nagging sense of urgency. A feeling that there was something important, something he needed to do. Jax jackknifed upright with a gasp, memory crashing over him in a wave. The cavern. The creature. The colonists, the desperate battle. The cliff. He looked around wildly, expecting the valley to be a scene of devastation. Instead, early morning sunlight slanted through the jarrah boughs, dappling the forest floor in gold. Disorientated, Jax stared at his surroundings in confusion. How? Easy there, hero. You've been out for a while. Jax whirled to see Zola watching him from a perch on a nearby log, a broad grin splitting her face. Zola. What? What happened? Where's the creature? Oh, you got it all right, she said with relish, pointing. Jax turned to look, eyes widening at the sight of the fresh rock fall that had reshaped the valley's western end. Boulders the size of shuttles lay tumbled at the cliff's base, burying the narrow defile that had housed the cavern entrance. Pretty sure you brought half the mountain down on the bastard, Zola continued. Once the dust settled, we dug through the rubble for hours. No sign of it, not even a scrap. Her smile softened, her eyes turning serious. You did it, Jax. You saved the colony. Saved all of us. Jax felt a rush of dizzying relief, followed swiftly by a stab of guilt. But I endangered you all in the first place, if I hadn't disturbed that cavern. But nothing. Zola cut him off firmly. You couldn't have known what was in there. And when you realized your mistake, you busted your ass to set it right. Took all the risk on yourself. She stood, dusting off her pants. Way I see it, that's the measure of a true hero. Someone who owns their mistakes and does everything in their power to fix them. Her eyes twinkled. Even if it means dropping a mountain on the problem. Despite himself, Jax felt a tired grin tugging at his lips. I guess I do tend to overdo things a bit. Zola barked a laugh. You think. The militia's still clearing rubble. But that's not all they found. She bent and retrieved a shard of oily black metal, tossing it to Jax. He caught it reflexively, frowning at the feel of it. It was part of the ruins from the creature's cavern, he realized. The lair it had lain dormant in for ancestors knew how long. There's more where that came from, Zola said. Lots more. The cave system runs deep. And the tech. I've never seen anything like it. Too advanced even for the ancestors. A chill walked up Jax's spine as grim possibilities unfurled in his mind. If this was just a relic, a fragment of whatever long-lost civilization had created that monstrosity, what other horrors might still be out there, waiting to be stumbled upon by an unsuspecting fool like himself? Zola, perhaps sensing his dark turn of thought, clapped him on the shoulder bracingly. Hey, one mystery at a time, yeah. Let's deal with this one before we go borrowing trouble. Jax shook himself, forced his dread aside. She was right. They had beaten this thing, at least. That was victory enough for now. So, he said, stretching and wincing as his bruises protested. What now? Dare I ask what our esteemed colonial administration wants to do with me? Zola smirked. Funny you should ask. Seems you're quite the celebrity now. The governor wants to give you a medal. Might have mentioned something about a statue, too. Jax blanched. A statue. Ancestors. No, I'd never live it down. He sighed, meeting her eyes. Honestly, I just want to go home. Home. Zola raised an eyebrow. You mean your homestead? After everything that's happened? Jax nodded firmly. This is my place. Zola. I claimed it. I bled for it. I'm not giving it up now. To his surprise, she smiled warmly. I had a feeling you'd say that. In that case, she produced a sheaf of documents with a flourish, waving them beneath his nose. By unanimous vote of the Colonial Council, and the quite insistent suggestion of the governor, I hereby present you the deed to the Western Valley, as well as funding and materials to rebuild your homestead." Jax gaped at her. I don't know what to say. There's more. Zola was grinning unabashedly now, clearly enjoying his shock. The valley's been officially renamed. "Welcome to Terra's Hold, Jax." Terra's Hold, he repeated, nonplussed. "But why?" Zola's grin softened into something warm and proud. "Because this is where Terra's children made their stand, Jax. Where we looked into the abyss, and the abyss blinked first. Where we proved that no matter what the universe throws at us, humanity will never stop fighting." She pressed the deed into his hands. "And because it was you who led that stand. You, a battered old soldier who thought his fighting days were done, who just wanted a quiet place to call his own. But when the call came, when your people needed you, you answered. You put it all on the line for us." Jax ducked his head, suddenly self-conscious. "I only did what anyone would have." "No," Zola cut him off, her voice fierce. "You did what a hero would do. What a true child of Terra would do." She gripped his shoulders, her eyes boring into his. "Own that, Jax. Wear it with pride." Slowly, hesitantly, Jax nodded. It would take some getting used to, this idea that he was somehow worthy of honor, of respect. But for his people, for the colony he had bled for, he would try. "I will," he promised. "And the first thing I'm going to do is put this place back together. Build something strong, something lasting." He looked out over the valley, his valley, determination swelling in his chest. "Terra's Hold will stand for generations, a monument to the strength of the human spirit." Zola clapped him on the back, her smile blinding. "Spoken like a true pioneer." She jerked her thumb over her shoulder, back towards the colony. "What do you say we head into town and rustle up some volunteers? I bet there's a whole bunch of folks just itching to help the hero of Terra's Hold build his new homestead." Jax laughed, surprising himself with how good it felt. "You're going to milk that for all it's worth, aren't you?" "Damn straight I am," Zola agreed cheerfully. "I happen to like having a living legend as a best friend. Think of all the free drinks." "Best friend, huh?" Jax felt a warmth kindling in his chest that had nothing to do with the morning sun. "You bet your ass," Zola confirmed. "I don't crash my ship into an abomination from the dark times for just anyone, you know." And with that, the two friends set off down the valley, their laughter and plans for the future ringing through the morning air. The dark specter of the creature still lurked in the shadows of memory, and the questions raised by the ancient ruins lingered. But for now, under the golden sun of an untamed world, with the promise of new beginnings stretching before them, it was enough to revel in the simple joy of being alive, of being human. Terra's Hold had endured its trial by fire. Now it would grow, would thrive, a living testament to humanity's indomitable will. And Jax would be there to see it, to nurture it. Come what may, he had finally found his place, his purpose. And woe betide any who sought to threaten it. For this was Terra's Hold, and Terra's children would never stop fighting for what was theirs.